She was just a cashier until the bullets started flying. Now, the deadliest man in Seoul is kneeling at her feet. In this hidden identity mafia romance, Isabella is a woman with a past she's desperate to bury. Working a dead-end mall job, she thought she was safe, until an armed robbery brings her face-to-face with Hangul, the cold-blooded Korean mafia boss. When she speaks, the mask slips. One voice, one secret, one forbidden love that refused to die. This BWWM Protector romance is an emotional roller coaster of suspense, betrayal, and steamy drama that proves you can never truly run from your destiny. The fluorescent lights of the Grand Plaza Mall flickered, casting a sterile glow over Isabella's checkout counter. To the customers, she was just a badge that read Bella, a woman with tired eyes and a polite, practiced smile. She scanned a box of detergent, her movements fluid and mechanical. Nobody noticed the way her eyes constantly tracked the exits, or how she cataloged every person entering her peripheral vision. Isabella had spent 3 years perfecting the art of being invisible.
That will be
"That'll be
$14.50.
$14.50, she said softly. Her voice was a low, melodic velvet, a voice that used to command rooms, not register totals. Suddenly, the glass front doors shattered. The sound was like a localized explosion. 6 men in tactical gear stormed the atrium, black rifles raised. Screams erupted instantly. People dove under tables, children wailed. Isabella didn't scream, she didn't even flinch. As a masked man leaped over the fountain, shouting for everyone to get on the ground, Isabella calmly reached under her counter. She wasn't reaching for a panic button. She was reaching for a heavy metal stapler, her fingers curling around it with a grip that suggested she knew exactly which nerve cluster to hit. "Everyone stay low and move toward the service corridor," she whispered to the huddling shoppers near her lane. Her voice was steady, the only calm thing in a sea of chaos. On the second-floor mezzanine, Hangul stood motionless. His charcoal suit was hand-tailored, his presence so imposing that even the shadows seemed to shrink away from him. He was the head of the most feared syndicate in the city, here for a simple business meeting that had clearly been a setup. "Boss, we should move," his lieutenant Jun hissed, reaching for his holster. "The gunmen are clearing the floor." Hangul didn't move. His dark eyes scanned the panicked crowd below with predatory indifference. He had seen death 1,000 times. Nothing moved him anymore. Not since the fire. Not since her. "They are amateurs," Hangul said, his voice like grinding stones. "Look at their footwork. They aren't here for the vault. They're here for a distraction." His gaze drifted toward the checkout counters. He saw a woman in a cheap polyester vest. She was the only person not shaking. She was ushering a group of elderly shoppers into a storage room with the calculated grace of a seasoned soldier. Something in the way she moved tugged at a memory he had tried to bury in a bottle of whiskey for 3 years. "Wait," Hangul whispered, his heart, usually a block of ice, giving a sudden painful thud. One of the robbers spotted Isabella. He leveled his rifle at her head. "You, on the floor now." Isabella stopped. She looked at the barrel of the gun, then up at the man's eyes. She didn't show fear. Instead, a cold, sharp light entered her gaze. "You're
You
holding
are
that
holding that
rifle with
rifle
too
with
much
too much
tension in your
tension in your
shoulder,"
shoulder.
she said. Her voice wasn't loud, but in the sudden lull of the room it carried. It was a rich, commanding alto that cut through the air like a knife. "You'll pull left if you fire. Drop the weapon and walk away while you still have your health." Up on the mezzanine, Hangul went deathly still. That voice. It was the voice that used to whisper his name in the dark. The voice that had supposedly been silenced when the safe house exploded in Busan. He had searched the ruins for weeks. He had found nothing but ash. "Isabella," he breathed the name, a prayer and a curse. He didn't wait for his guards. Hangul vaulted over the marble railing, dropping 10 feet to the ground floor with a thud that echoed through the mall. The robber turned, startled by the new threat, but Hangul was a blur of violence. In 2 seconds, the gunman's wrist was snapped, and Hangul was standing over him, though his eyes never left the cashier. Isabella froze, her mask of anonymity shattered. "Hangul," she whispered. The robber groaned on the floor, but the world had stopped for the Mafia boss and the woman who had died 3 years ago. Hangul took a step toward her, ignoring the chaos. The way he walked, the predatory, silent glide of a man who owned every room, sent a shiver down Isabella's spine that she hadn't felt in years. "Isabella," he said again. It wasn't a question this time, it was a claim. "You're supposed to be in Seoul," she whispered, her hands finally beginning to shake. She tucked them behind her back, trying to regain the stone-cold composure of a mall cashier. "And I'm supposed to be dead." "I burned half of Busan looking for your body," Hangul growled, his voice dropping to a dangerous, intimate vibration. "I held a funeral for an empty casket." Behind them, the remaining 4 robbers regrouped. They saw the legendary head of the Korean syndicate standing in the open, distracted. One of them leveled his submachine gun at Hangul's back. "Boss, behind you," Jun shouted from the mezzanine, his own weapon clearing leather. Isabella didn't think. The 3 years of suppressed instincts roared back to life. She grabbed a heavy glass display jar from the counter and flung it with lethal precision. It shattered against the gunman's temple just as he pulled the trigger. The bullet sprayed harmlessly into the ceiling. "Still the best aim in the organization," Hangul remarked, not even glancing at the man who had almost killed him. "Why did you run, Bella?" The mall's security shutters began to hiss as they slammed shut, triggered by the alarm system. They were trapped. The robbers were frantic now, realizing they were locked in a cage with a man far more dangerous than the police. "We need to move," Isabella said, her Bella persona completely gone. Her eyes were sharp, calculating the exits. "They aren't just thieves, Hangul, look at their ink. They're the Red Dragons. They knew you were coming here." Hangul's eyes darkened. If the Red Dragons were here, this wasn't a robbery, it was an assassination attempt. "Jun, clear the perimeter," Hangul barked. He reached out, his gloved hand wrapping firmly around Isabella's wrist. The heat of his skin through the leather made her breath hitch. "Let go of me," she hissed. "I don't belong to your world anymore." "You never left it," he countered, pulling her flush against his chest. For a second, the terror of the mall disappeared, replaced by the familiar scent of sandalwood and danger. "You are the only person who knows their tactics. You're going to help me kill them, and then you're going to tell me why you let me mourn you for 3 years." They ducked into the darkened service corridor just as a grenade detonated in the main atrium. The blast shook the walls, showering them in dust. In the narrow, dim hallway, Hangul pressed her against the cinderblock wall. His body was a cage of muscle and expensive wool. He was too close, his breath fanning over her lips. "You changed your hair," he murmured, his thumb brushing a stray curl away from her forehead. "And your name, but your voice. I would know that voice in the middle of a war." Isabella felt the old flame licking at her heart. She had spent 1,000 days trying to forget the way he looked at her, like she was the only thing in the world worth saving. "I ran to save your life, Hangul," she whispered, her voice cracking. "The elders. They said if I stayed, they'd eliminate you to purify the bloodline. I had to make them believe I was gone." Hangul's jaw tightened. "I would have slaughtered the elders for you." "I know," she said sadly. "That's why I left." A shadow moved at the end of the hall. Isabella reacted instantly, pulling a concealed blade from her waistband, the one she'd hidden for 3 years under the register. "Later," she said, her eyes turning to ice. "First we survived, then we talk." The red emergency lights pulsed in the narrow hallway, casting Hangul's sharp features in a rhythmic, bloody glow. Every time the light flashed, Isabella saw the hunger in his eyes, a mix of fury and relief that made her knees weak despite the adrenaline. "Two on the left, one on the catwalk," Isabella whispered, her back pressed against Hangul. It was a dance they hadn't performed in years, yet their bodies remembered the rhythm perfectly. Hangul didn't even turn his head. He trusted her eyes more than his own. "They're using thermal," Hangul noted, spotting the faint red hum of a drone hovering near the ventilation shafts. "The Red Dragons aren't here for a heist. They've turned this mall into a slaughterhouse just to find us." Isabella gripped her makeshift blade. "The maintenance room has a jammer. If we reach it, we blind them." "Then move," Hangul commanded, his hand sliding down to grip hers. They bolted. Bullets chewed into the drywall behind them, spitting dust and insulation. Hangul pivoted, firing his suppressed pistol with surgical precision. Two shooters fell from the mezzanine like broken dolls. Isabella didn't flinch. She was already calculating the distance to the heavy steel door at the end of the hall. For a moment, as they ran hand in hand through the gunfire, Isabella felt more alive than she had in 3 years of scanning groceries. The Bella she had built was a lie. This, the chaos, the danger, and the man beside her, was her truth. They slid into the maintenance sublevel, slamming the deadbolt just as a heavy boot thudded against the other side. The room was hot, filled with the roar of industrial boilers and the scent of grease. Isabella leaned against a vibrating pipe, gasping for air. "We have 10 minutes before they blow that door." Hangul didn't look at the door. He walked toward her, his silhouette towering and lethal in the steam-filled room. He stopped inches away, his presence crowding her senses. 3 years, he rasped, his voice vibrating in his chest. "I lived in a tomb, Isabella. I killed everyone who even looked like the men who burned you. And you were here, selling milk and bread." "I was surviving," she snapped, her eyes flashing. "The elders told me your life was the price of my stay. I chose your life over my happiness. Do you have any idea what it's like to watch you on the news, knowing I can't touch you?" Hangul's hand shot out, pinning her against the boiler. The heat of the metal behind her was nothing compared to the fire in his touch. "I don't want your sacrifice," he growled. "I want you." The air in the small room felt electric, thick with the weight of everything unsaid. The sounds of the gunmen outside faded into the background, replaced by the heavy thrum of their racing hearts. Hangul's gaze dropped to her lips. The cold, calculated Mafia boss was gone, replaced by a man starved of his soul. Isabella reached up, her fingers trembling as she touched the scar on his jaw, a mark he'd gained the night she died. "You shouldn't have found me, Hangul," she breathed, even as she leaned into his space. "I didn't find you," he murmured, his face inches from hers. "My heart stopped the day you left. It only started beating again when I heard you speak at that register." His hand moved from the wall to the back of her neck, his fingers tangling in her hair. The touch was possessive, desperate. Isabella knew that if she let him kiss her now, there was no going back to her quiet life. The mall cashier would be dead for real this time, replaced by the queen of the soul underworld. "Hangul," she warned, but it sounded more like an invitation. A massive explosion rocked the door. The steel groaned, buckling inward. The Red Dragons were through. Hangul didn't pull away. He pressed his forehead against hers for one brief, searing second. "Stay behind me. When this is over, you're never leaving my sight again." The smoke from the breached door swirled in the maintenance room, mixing with the heavy steam from the leaking pipes. The transition from the tender, desperate reunion to cold, hard violence was instantaneous. The door didn't just open, it disintegrated. Two Red Dragon assassins charged through the haze, their muzzles flashing. Hangul didn't flinch. He shoved Isabella behind a heavy steel coolant tank and returned fire with a rhythmic, terrifying calm. But Isabella wasn't content to hide. She saw a third shooter flanking from the ventilation duct above Hangul's head. "Hangul 12 o'clock high," she roared. As he pivoted to take the shot, Isabella surged forward. She grabbed a heavy industrial wrench from a nearby workbench. In one fluid motion, she slid across the greasy floor, sweeping the legs out from under the lead gunman. Before he could hit the ground, she drove the wrench into his temple. He went limp instantly. She stripped the submachine gun from his hands, checked the chamber, and stood up. Hangul looked at her, a dark, proud smirk tugging at the corner of his mouth despite the gunfire. "I miss this part of you most of all." "Focus, Hangul," she snapped, though her heart was hammering against her ribs. "We have a perimeter to break." Outside in the main corridor, the sound of heavy boots echoed, not the chaotic rhythm of the robbers, but the synchronized thud of a professional army. "The cavalry is here," Hangul said, his voice dropping into its king register. The service doors at the far end of the hall were kicked open. A dozen men in black tactical gear, marked with the silver tiger crest of Hangul's syndicate, flooded the space. At their head was Jun, his face pale with worry. "Boss, we've secured the—" Jun stopped dead. His gaze shifted from Hangul to the woman standing beside him, holding a stolen rifle like she'd been born with it. The soldiers froze. Some of them crossed themselves. To them, they were looking at a ghost. "Isabellanim," Jun whispered, his voice trembling. It can't be." "She's alive, Jun," Hangul said, his hand finding the small of Isabella's back, staking his claim in front of his entire inner circle. "And she's coming home." The mall was finally silent, save for the distant sirens of the police cordoning off the exterior. Hangul's men moved with lethal efficiency, cleaning the scene before the authorities could break through the shutters. Isabella stood in the center of the wreckage, looking down at her Bella name tag, which had been torn during the fight. It lay in a pool of oil and blood. "You can't just take me back, Hangul," she said softly, her voice echoing in the hollow atrium. "The elders, they haven't changed. If they see me, the war starts all over again." Hangul stepped in front of her, blocking her view of the bodies. He reached out and ripped the name tag from her vest, crushing it in his fist. "Let them start a war," he said, his eyes burning with a terrifying intensity. "I spent 3 years being a king without a heart. I'm bored of peace, Isabella. If the world wants to take you from me again, I'll burn the world." The devotion in his voice was a physical weight. It was the love of a monster, and it was the only thing that had ever made her feel safe. An hour later, they were in the back of a blacked-out armored limousine, racing away from the mall. The city lights blurred past the tinted windows. The silence inside the car was suffocating. The adrenaline was fatting, leaving behind the raw, aching reality of 3 lost years. Isabella sat on the far side of the leather bench, her hands still stained with the mall's grime. Hangul didn't stay on his side. He moved closer, his large frame making the spacious car feel small. "Talk to me," he commanded. "I don't know who I am anymore," she admitted, looking at her reflection. "I've spent 3 years being a woman who likes gardening and goes to bed at 9:00 p.m. I'm not the black diamond of the Soul Syndicate anymore." Hangul reached out, his fingers tracing the line of her throat. "The diamond is still there. I saw her back in that maintenance room. She's just hungry." They arrived at his private estate, a fortress of glass and steel perched above the city. As the doors opened, the staff bowed so low their foreheads nearly touched the floor. Word had traveled fast. The king had found his queen. Hangul led her directly to his master suite. He didn't call for a maid. He didn't call for a doctor. He closed the heavy oak doors and locked them. The room was exactly as she remembered it, scented with his cologne and lined with books he never had time to read. "Wash the mall off you," he said, his voice thick with a new kind of tension. He began unbuttoning his waistcoat, his eyes never leaving hers. "I've had a ghost in my bed for 3 years, Isabella. Tonight I want the woman." Isabella felt a surge of heat that had nothing to do with the heaters. "Hangul, we have so much to discuss. The red dragons, the elders." "Tomorrow," he growled, stepping into her personal space. "Tonight, the only thing that matters is that you're breathing." Isabella stepped into the rainfall shower, the hot water washing away the blood and the Bella persona. When she stepped out, wrapped in a plush silk robe, Hangul was waiting by the floor-to-ceiling window, a glass of dark scotch in his hand. He had discarded his shirt. The scars on his back, some old, some new, told the story of the violent years they had spent apart. She walked up behind him and placed her hand on his bare shoulder. He stiffened, then let out a long, ragged breath. "I
I
used to
used to
dream
dream
of
of
this,"
this.
he whispered, thinking I was going mad. Isabella turned him around. The moonlight hit his face, softening the hard edges of the Mafia boss. She saw the man who had cried for her. She saw the man who would kill for her. "I'm not a dream anymore, Hangul," she said, her voice dropping to that velvet alto that had frozen him in the mall. She reached for the tie of her robe. The 3 years of silence were over. The danger was still outside the door, but in this room there was only the fire they had both tried and failed to extinguish. The silence in the penthouse was thick, charged with the static of 3 years of repressed longing. Outside, the Seoul skyline glittered like a sea of diamonds, but inside, the only light came from the amber glow of the fireplace. Isabella let the silk robe slip from her shoulders. In the moonlight, her skin glowed like polished mahogany. Hangul's glass of scotch hit the floor with a muffled thud, the liquid soaking into the white rug. He didn't care. He moved toward her, his large hands trembling as they hovered just inches from her waist. It was as if he feared she would dissolve into smoke if he touched her. "You're real," he rasped, his voice breaking. "I'm here, Hangul. I'm not going anywhere." He let out a low, animalistic growl and closed the distance. His mouth crashed against hers, not with the gentleness of a reunion, but with the desperation of a starving man. Isabella met his fire with her own, her fingers digging into the hard muscles of his back. The taste of salt and scotch in him flooded her senses, erasing the sterile smell of the mall forever. He lifted her easily, her legs wrapping around his waist as he carried her to the massive bed. The sheets were cool, but the air between them was scorching. Every kiss was a question. "Where have you been? Why did you leave?" Every touch was an answer. "I'm yours. I never stopped being yours." As Hangul moved over her, his eyes were dark with a possessive hunger that would have terrified any other woman. But Isabella was the black diamond. She arched her back, pulling him closer, needing to feel the weight of him crushing the last 3 years of loneliness out of her lungs. In the heat of their union, the Mafia king and his ghost were finally one. Isabella woke to the smell of expensive coffee and the sound of low, hushed voices. She shifted in the oversized bed, the silk sheets feeling like a foreign luxury against her skin. Hangul was standing by the window, already dressed in a crisp white shirt, though it was unbuttoned at the collar. He was on the phone, his face carved from granite.
I don't
"I don't
care
care
if
if
they
they're
are hiding in a
a
church.
Hangul said into the receiver. "If they touched her, they don't get a trial, they get a funeral." He hung up and turned, his expression softening the moment he saw Isabella. He walked over and sat on the edge of the bed, pressing a firm kiss to her forehead.
The red dragons are
"The
being
red
hunted.
dragons are being hunted," he said. "But we have a bigger problem. The elders have called an emergency summit. They know you're alive." 2 hours later, Isabella was no longer wearing a cashier's vest. She stood in Hangul's private study wearing a tailored black suit that hugged her curves and commanded respect. Her hair was pulled back into a sleek, lethal bun. Jun entered, bowing lower than he ever had before. "The elders are waiting in the boardroom, boss. They are displeased." "Let them
Let them
be
be
displeased,"
displeased.
Isabella said, her voice dropping into the cold, authoritative tone that had once made lieutenants tremble. She checked the weight of a small, silver pistol tucked into her thigh holster. Hangul watched her, a look of pure, unadulterated pride in his eyes. "They think you're a weakness I've reclaimed, Bella. They think I'm soft because I love you." "Then let's show them," she replied, stepping toward the door. "That a king is only as dangerous as the queen standing beside him." The boardroom doors swung open. 12 elderly men sat around a long obsidian table, their faces etched with tradition and malice. At the head of the table sat Elder Park, the man who had threatened Isabella 3 years ago. "Hangul," Park began, his voice thin and reedy. "You bring a ghost into our sanctum. You risk the stability of the syndicate for a woman who abandoned her post." Hangul didn't sit. He stood behind Isabella, his hands resting on her shoulders, a clear message of protection and power. Isabella leaned forward, resting her palms on the obsidian table. She looked Elder Park straight in the eye, her gaze unafraid. "I didn't abandon my post, Elder," she said, her voice echoing with a chilling stillness. "I was protecting the king from the vipers in his own nest, and now that I'm back, I think it's time we start clearing out the weeds." The room went deathly silent. The war hadn't just begun. Isabella had just fired the first shot. The atmosphere in the boardroom was so thick with tension that the air felt hard to breathe. The elders, men who had ruled the shadows for decades, looked at Isabella not as a woman, but as a glitch in their perfect system. Elder Park's face contorted into a mask of righteous fury. "You speak of weeds, girl. You are the infection. You were a distraction 3 years ago, and you are a liability now." Hangul's grip on Isabella's shoulders tightened, his knuckles turning white. The room grew cold as he leaned forward, his voice a low, dangerous vibration. "Careful, Park. You are speaking to my wife." A collective gasp rippled through the room. They hadn't been married, not legally, but in the underworld the king's word was the law of the land. Isabella didn't blink. She noticed Park's hand twitching toward his pocket. Her Bella days had taught her patience, but her black diamond instincts taught her lethality. "You're nervous, Elder. Is it because the red dragons failed to kill us at the mall, or because you know I have the ledger you thought burned in Busan?" Park froze. The ledger contained 30 years of embezzled syndicate funds. It was the leverage Isabella had used to stay alive while in hiding. "Kill them," Park shrieked, abandoning all pretense of dignity. The doors burst open, but it wasn't Park's men who entered. It was Jun and a squad of Hangul's elite tigers. The boardroom became a blur of motion. Hangul flipped the obsidian table with a roar of pure strength, using it as a shield for Isabella as bullets began to fly. Isabella didn't stay behind the shield. She rolled to the left, drawing her silver pistol in a motion so fast it was almost invisible. Pop! Pop! 2 of Park's hidden guards fell before they could clear their holsters. She moved with the grace of a panther, weaving through the chaos. She wasn't just a cashier anymore. She was the storm. She reached Park just as he tried to scramble for the emergency exit. She pressed the cold barrel of her gun against his temple. "The mall cashier was patient," she whispered into his ear. "The queen, not so much." The smoke cleared, leaving a ringing silence in the boardroom. The coup had been short, brutal, and decisive. Those elders who hadn't sided with Park were on their knees, heads bowed in submission to Hangul. Hangul walked over to Isabella, stepping over the wreckage. He took the gun from her hand and replaced it with his own, lacing their fingers together. "Is it over?" he asked, searching her eyes for any trace of the woman who wanted to run. Isabella looked at the blood on her sleeve, then at the man who had waited a lifetime for her. "The hiding is over, Hangul. The rest, that's just business." He pulled her into a fierce embrace, his face buried in the crook of her neck. "Jun, clean this mess, and call the jeweler. My queen needs a ring that can be seen from the moon." 1 week later, Isabella returned to the mall. She wasn't wearing a polyester vest. She was draped in a silk trench coat that cost more than her previous annual salary. The closed for repairs signs were still up, but the manager, a man who had once yelled at her for taking a 5-minute bathroom break, was there. He paled when he saw her, flanked by 4 massive men in suits. "Bella," he stammered.
Bella!
"It's Isabella," she said, placing a thick envelope on the counter. This is for the staff, for the trauma, and tell them the mall has a new owner. She looked at her old register. It felt like a lifetime ago that she had been scanning detergent. She realized now that she hadn't been hiding from Hangul. She had been hiding from her own power. She turned and walked out into the sunlight, where Hangul was waiting by the car, looking at her like she was the sun itself. That night they stood on the balcony of their new home, a fortress overlooking the sea. The wind whipped Isabella's hair, but she didn't feel the chill. Hangul stood behind her, his arms wrapped securely around her waist. The elders are gone. The red dragons are a memory, Hangul murmured. What now, my queen? Isabella leaned back against his chest, watching the waves crash against the rocks below. She thought about the voice that had given her away, the voice that had saved her life. Now, she said, turning in his arms to face him, we build something that doesn't require us to hide, a legacy. Hangul smiled, a genuine, rare expression that reached his eyes. He leaned down, his lips brushing hers. Whatever you want, Isabella, the world is yours. I'm just the man lucky enough to stand beside you. As they kissed under the stars, the mall cashier was officially dead. The black diamond had returned, and the underworld would never be the same again. From the flickering lights of a grocery aisle to the obsidian throne of an underworld empire, Isabella and Hangul's journey proves that destiny always finds a way. In a world of secrets and shadows, their love was the only thing that couldn't be buried. Isabella may have started the day as a woman trying to disappear, but she ended it as the woman who claimed it all. Their story is a testament to the power of a voice that refuses to be silenced and a heart that never stops searching. Join the conversation. A story this intense is bound to leave a mark. We want to hear from you. Which part of the story was your absolute favorite? Was it the heart-stopping moment Hangul first recognized Isabella's voice? The high-stakes shootout in the mall's maintenance room? Or the powerful moment she reclaimed her throne in the boardroom? Drop a comment below and let us know. Your feedback helps us bring more of these gripping romances to life. Don't miss out. If you loved this BWWM Mafia romance, make sure to like, follow, and subscribe for more stories of forbidden love, hidden identities, and dangerous passion. Click the link in the bio to read more exclusive stories and discover your next favorite obsession.